I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. We've already looked at a couple of films from Disney's strange dark phase in the early 80s. Something Wicked This Way Comes and The Watcher in the Woods. When Ron Miller became CEO at the end of the 1970s, he wanted to take Walt Disney Productions into slightly more mature territory, and the first fruit of those labours was from 1979, Disney's The Black Hole. It is also the first film from Walt Disney Productions to ever get a PG certificate. We follow the crew of the deep space vessel, the USS Palomino, as it's pulled off course by the gravitational pull of an enormous black hole. Near the event horizon is a huge, seemingly derelict space hulk, which is somehow defying the black hole's gravitational pull. The ship is the long-lost USS Cygnus, and once on board, the crew of the Palomino find out that it is very far from derelict. So why am I covering what is ostensibly a kid's sci-fi film on what's supposed to be a horror channel? Firstly, I love the movie, and I think that's reason enough. But another reason is that The Black Hole is essentially a classic horror movie dressed up in all the trappings of a sci-fi movie. The vast Gothic cathedral of the USS Cygnus is the ancient castle of Otranto. It's the Gothic castle off in the foreign lands, the unknown places where our travellers find ourselves and the evil lives. The crew of the Palomino are the travellers who must stay in the castle for the night before continuing their journey. Dr. Hans Reinhardt, supposedly sole survivor of the crew of the Cygnus, is the mad scientist who lives in this Gothic castle. He's described as a Frankenstein character by members of the crew. When he's dressed in his formal wear, he's coded to look like Dracula. His air of European foreignness only adds fuel to that particular fire. His robots that staff the ship are creatures of his creation, essentially ghouls. Technically, they're cyborgs, but in all but name, they're zombies. A resurrected workforce under the yoke of Maximilian, and there we have a character that's part Igor, right-hand assistant to the Frankenstein character, part Frankenstein monster, a creation that eventually overwhelms the creator. A monster iconic enough to this young mind to easily imprint itself upon my imagination in exactly the same way as Boris Karloff's creature ever did. And then we have the black hole itself always looming in the background, an existential terror, a cosmic horror. It's no coincidence that upon seeing it, one of the characters exclaims, "My God, it's like something out of Dante's Inferno." If the promo for Interstellar is to be believed, Christopher Nolan may well have given us the most scientifically accurate representation of the event horizon of a black hole, but it was the dark whirlpool in space which gripped my imagination as a child. This huge mouth, constantly open, eternally voracious, always there in the background, waiting to swallow everything. And while I do unashamedly love the black hole, I have to acknowledge that it has a few narrative gears that it doesn't glide perfectly through, but rather crunches ham-fistedly around, moving from one section to another. You have this horror element that grinds against this sort of goofy, child-friendly robot comedy designed to sell toys against a sort of 2001 inspired portentous sense of nonsense put alongside the odd bit of action that's sort of plopped in at the end when it seems that someone realises, oh, hang on a minute, we're supposed to be making something a little bit like Star Wars. And yet that seems out of place at the very end in a movie which for the most part is quite sedate, perhaps even whisper it, slightly boring. As members of the crew of the Palomino plod around a large, mainly empty ship, up corridors, prodding around behind doors. A bunch of characters with a small c who are clearly forced to spout out awful lines of absolute drivel in the place of dialogue, rather than having anything remotely adjacent to characters, relationships, or even normal conversations. And yet, like the titular cosmic phenomena, there is something about Disney's The Black Hole which inevitably pulls me into its orbit, and I can't help but adore this strange, weird hybrid beast. I mean, in parts it's so silly. Robots who can respond to ESP, voiced by Slim Pickens, against a score by John Barry, which he's clearly in James Bond mode, which is grand and melancholy and dripping with a kind of fin de siècle, end of empire majesty. And these incongruities shoot right through the cast as well, and it's a stellar cast. Robert Forster, Maximilian Schell, Ernest Borgnine, Anthony Perkins, Slim Pickens, as I mentioned, the voice of Roddy McDowall. Anything with Roddy McDowall in it is instantly better. And yet, as a man in my 40s, I can look at this cast and go, this is absolutely brilliant and weird that they're all in this movie. As a kid in 1979, I can't imagine anyone would look at the poster and go, Ernest Borgnine and Robert Forster? Mom, can we go and see The Black Hole? So yes, it's slow, it's ponderous. Yes, people spout statements rather than have conversations. But all the way through, there's this dark menace, this haunted castle of a space movie that builds to that bonkers ending. I mean, right at the start, we have Chekhov's gun, or Chekhov's black hole. If you see a black hole in the first act, you have to go through it in the third act. And for want of any better idea, why not find out that on the other end of the black hole is actual literal hell, and this strange existential nightmare imagery that's obviously trying to allude to the psychedelia and visual narrative without dialogue that happens at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. But in grasping for those stars, it seems to have hit upon something freakishly nihilistic. How are small minds supposed to comprehend the dreadful vision of Dr. Reinhardt, now with beard and hair grown out? How long has he been there? Tumbling through eternity, merging with Maximilian, becoming imprisoned in him, and then forced to watch stand sentinel over a literal hellscape before our heroes pass through some sort of heavenly corridor and out the other side of a white hole, presumably. The Black Hole is not the last movie that will stretch for these big sci-fi ideas and come back with fists full of theology. Danny Boyle's Sunshine, another fantastic sci-fi movie, goes weirdly Hellraiser at the end with the proximity to the sun. And of course you've got Event Horizon. I can't watch the end of The Black Hole where our crew goes to hell and not think of the Event Horizon coming back from its journey and we find out that it's come back itself from hell. I like to think that the USS Cygnus and the Event Horizon are both ships from the same universe that have both travelled beyond the veil and gone themselves to hell. Yes, in my mind, Event Horizon is a sequel to Disney's The Black Hole. If you're still here, thank you for hanging on in. There's one more film in the dark Disney phase that I might talk about if you want me to, and that's Dragon Slayer. Let me know in the comments down below if you want me to touch upon Dragon Slayer, otherwise I'll just sidestep back into normal horror fare and normal service on the channel will resume.